She came to sell her grandmother's house, tucked deep in the forest, nothing more. But this strange house, with its massive wooden canopy, held secrets no one had told her. What she found hidden under the canopy would unravel everything she thought she knew and change the course of her life forever. Subscribe for more powerful stories and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. At 31, Amelia Carter believed she had done everything right. She'd climbed the silent ladder of adulthood one cautious step at a time. Her life in Cleveland, Ohio, was far from glamorous, but it was hers anchored by early train rides, a job in payroll processing that asked for precision, not passion, and a modest apartment she bought on her own. The mortgage had been terrifying, the keys heavier than they should have been, but they meant independence, stability, a home. That illusion crumbled the day she skimmed a legal document, trusting a smile from the wrong man, a clause overlooked, a signature too quick. And just like that, the apartment her anchor was gone. Emails turned to eviction notices, phone calls led to voicemail loops. The system didn't need her guilt. It only needed her absence. 1 week later, her phone rang again. A voice she didn't know told her her grandmother had passed. She hadn't seen Grandma Eloise in over a decade. They'd grown distant, like so many things in her life. The old woman had left behind one thing: a wooden house deep in the forests of Vermont. No savings, no explanations. Just that house. She planned to sell it, nothing more. Amelia arrived in Vermont just as late autumn surrendered to something colder, grayer, and far more silent. The drive stretched longer than she expected. Paved roads faded into gravel, then into something not quite road at all, just a suggestion carved through the trees. No cell signal, no traffic, no way to turn back without admitting defeat. When the house finally emerged from the dense pine forest, it didn't feel like discovery. It felt like interruption, like the woods had been holding their breath and suddenly exhaled, revealing her grandmother's secret. The structure was odd, not broken down or decaying, just still. A log house, aged and weather-darkened, stood rooted in a clearing, wrapped in a massive wooden canopy that stretched far beyond the roof itself. It wasn't decorative, it was deliberate, almost protective, like a cloak shielding the entire property from what lay beyond. She stepped out of the car. The cold air hit her lungs like glass. There was no creak of trees, no chirp of birds, just windless silence, thick and pressing. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like it had been waiting for her. She tried to shake off the unease. "It's just a house," she muttered, dragging her suitcase up the old porch steps. "Sign the papers. Sell. Go home." Inside, everything was clean. Not tidy in a modern Airbnb kind of way, but intentional. Heavy furniture crafted for function, not fashion. Wood stove in the center, narrow windows, thick curtains. A single photograph on the mantel her grandmother, younger than Amelia remembered, standing under the same canopy, her eyes fierce and steady. That night, Amelia didn't unpack. She unzipped one bag, laid her coat over the bed, and stared at the ceiling as the forest pressed against the walls. There were no city sounds. No heater clicks, no car horns, just the slow tick of a clock and the quiet shifting of wood. She told herself she'd leave by the end of the week. But the next morning, the road was softer. The dirt, wet and dark, gave way under her tires as she attempted to drive back toward the nearest notary office. After a few failed tries and a near slide into a ditch, she gave up and returned to the house. The canopy caught her attention then, not just because of its size, But its structure, it wasn't just a porch roof, it was an extension of the home. Wide beams, cross-braced and reinforced, stretched outward like arms. Beneath it was stacked wood, carefully organized tools, and a hand-built table weathered by years of use. She ran her fingers over the grain. It wasn't decorative lumber. This was built for survival. As the days passed, she tried to maintain her city habits. Wake early, check emails, file documents. But the internet dropped in and out. Deadlines blurred, calls failed. Even time itself began to feel optional. The forest didn't care about her schedule. She found herself staring at the canopy each afternoon, standing beneath its shadow. It created a strange stillness. No wind touched her there. No snow accumulated. It was the only place outside the house that felt livable. One evening, as dusk smeared the sky in gray and lavender, she lit a fire and stood under that vast wooden overhang. The silence pressed against her again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt observant. It felt like something was listening. That night, the power flickered once, then died. She froze in the kitchen, staring at the blank screen of her phone, waiting for the lights to return. They didn't. She lit candles found in a drawer with a box of matches already half used. It was as if her grandmother had known this would happen, as if this house, this canopy, this quiet place, had always been preparing for someone like Amelia. Wrapped in a blanket, she sat by the fire, the flames painting the walls in gold and shadow. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of something she didn't yet understand. She wasn't sure what had shifted, but in that moment, under the quiet gaze of the canopy and the growing dark, she knew this was no longer just a house she intended to sell. It was a story, and it had been waiting for her to listen. The morning after the power outage, Amelia stepped outside into a world changed. Overnight, the forest had transformed. A thin layer of snow blanketed everything the path. The trees, the canopy roof overhead. It wasn't deep, not yet, but it erased lines and softened edges, blurring what little familiarity she'd clung to. She stood under the canopy, coffee mug warming her fingers, staring into the quiet. That was when she noticed the tracks. They weren't hers. Footprints, human. Light enough to be older than the snow, but fresh enough to be visible. They led not away from the house, but toward it. Her breath caught. She scanned the woods, her eyes darting between tree trunks, expecting something, but nothing moved, no sound, no sign of life. She followed the tracks cautiously, her boots crunching softly on the frost. They ended beneath the canopy, just stopped right where she'd been standing the night before. Someone had been watching her. Her heartbeat quickened. She locked the door when she went back inside, even though she told herself she was overreacting. It was probably a neighbor, a hiker, a harmless stranger. Right. But later that evening, the knock came. Not Siri, just a soft, deliberate tap on the front door. Amelia froze mid-step. The fire crackled behind her, the only other sound in the room. She waited, praying she'd imagined it. Another knock. She stepped forward slowly, heart pounding in her chest. Through the window, she could make out the figure small, hunched, bundled in layers stitched and patched over decades. An old woman. When she opened the door, the woman didn't smile. She simply nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. Her face was weathered, wind-burnt, her eyes bright with watchfulness. She looked like she belonged to the forest, like she had been shaped by it. "You must be Eloise's girl," the woman said, not a question, a statement. Amelia blinked. "Yes, I'm her granddaughter." That changed something in the woman's expression. The lines in her face eased. Her voice lowered. "She built this place right," she said, her eyes scanning the canopy above. Not just for herself. She didn't explain what she meant. Instead, she asked if the house was being used again and whether Amelia had enough supplies for winter. Amelia stammered through her answers, unsure what to make of any of it. The woman never gave her name. She didn't stay long, just spoke briefly about the snow coming faster than usual this year and the way the birds had gone quiet too early. Then she turned to leave, disappearing into the woods like a ghost dressed in wool. Amelia stood at the door long after she was gone. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she searched the house with a different kind of focus. She looked for signs, anything left behind by her grandmother, letters, notes, clues, but everything was carefully arranged, intentional, without excess, and still, something buzzed beneath it all, an impression, a message not written in ink. When she returned to the canopy that afternoon, she stood longer than usual. She studied the way the beams were angled, the slope of the roof, the way the space underneath felt warmer, protected, like it held heat even without fire. She noticed something she hadn't before, small, square panels built into the support posts, almost invisible in daylight. She touched one. It moved just a little. A hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, were 3 items: a rusted key, a hand-drawn map, and a small notebook with a faded sticker that simply read, "For the next one." Her fingers trembled as she opened the notebook. Inside, the handwriting was neat, direct, unmistakably her grandmother's. The entries weren't dated, they weren't emotional, they were instructional. Inventory logs, notes on local plants, a sketch of the canopy's frame, and one sentence that stood out, underlined in red ink. The house was never meant to be empty. If you're reading this, you're not here by accident. Amelia sat beneath the canopy for a long time, snow beginning to fall again around her, her breath curling into the air. What had started as an inconvenience, a house to offload, a burden to be managed, was no longer that. It was something deeper, something older, something planned. And she wasn't just here to witness it. She was now part of it. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Amelia hadn't known she was capable of living. She woke early, not because she had to, but because the fire required it. The wood stove, old and iron black, was the pulse of the house. Feed it wrong, and the rooms chilled fast. Feed it well, and warmth lingered like memory. At first, she told herself this was all temporary. A strange pause before life resumed. But with each passing day, her excuses grew thinner. She no longer kept her bags packed. Her laptop sat closed, dusty. The city deadlines that once dictated her breath now felt absurd, like echoes from a world that no longer applied. She started to notice things. The way the canopy didn't just block snow, but redirected wind. How its beams cast shadows that marked the time better than any clock. How her grandmother had carved tiny markings into one support post-sun symbols, moon phases, weather notations, a tracking system, a language. It began to sink in this house wasn't improvised, it was engineered for endurance. Every drawer, every shelf, every seemingly odd decision now revealed quiet brilliance. Food wasn't stored randomly. It was rotated, sealed, elevated. She found dry herbs strung above a vent that funneled warm air from the stove, slowly curing them all winter long. Water collected from snowmelt was funneled through handmade filters beneath the porch. This wasn't just a survival cabin. It was a philosophy, built in timber and stone. Amelia's grip on her former life loosened slowly. Then, all at once. The apartment she lost in Cleveland, she used to replay that story at night like a punishment. She'd blame herself for not reading the contract, for trusting too easily. The guilt was soothing, in a twisted way. If it was her fault, then maybe the world still made sense. But now, surrounded by the quiet discipline her grandmother had left behind, that version of the story began to crack. She hadn't failed. She'd been overwhelmed, exhausted, alone in a system designed for speed, not care. Her mistake didn't mean she deserved to lose everything. This house was the opposite of that world. It didn't reward speed, it rewarded attention, and Amelia, slowly but surely, was learning how to give it. One afternoon, she sat beneath the canopy again, notebook in hand, not her phone, not a spreadsheet, just paper. She began sketching the beams overhead, tracing their angles, the way they cradled the open space like ribs. That's when she remembered the map. She had tucked it away days earlier, unsure what to make of it. Now, with clearer eyes, she unfolded it. It wasn't a map of the woods. It was a map of the house. A layout, detailed and precise, including things she hadn't seen yet: trapdoors, panels, compartments. One marked only with a symbol, a circle surrounded by 3 small dots. She had no idea what it meant, but she circled it again. Later that night, as snow ticked gently against the windows, she lit the fire, opened her grandmother's notebook, and began reading aloud. Her own voice startled her. It had been so long since she'd heard it spoken without purpose. There was no ceremony, no revelation, just this quiet act of connection. And in that moment, something shifted. This place wasn't just shelter. It was instruction, legacy, design that extended beyond the physical. Her grandmother hadn't abandoned the world. She had anticipated its failures and built something that could endure in its absence. Amelia leaned back in the old armchair by the stove, the firelight soft on the log walls, and realized something she hadn't dared admit before. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because perhaps for the first time in her life, she finally understood what it meant to stay. Amelia stood in the middle of the main room, map in hand, staring at the wall where the mysterious symbol had been marked. It was nothing special at first glance. Just a smooth log panel beside the old storage bench, but the house had already taught her that ordinary was often camouflage. She pressed her fingers along the grain, searching for weakness. A soft click. Her breath caught. The panel shifted inward, revealing a narrow compartment behind the wall, wrapped in shadow and dust. Inside, sealed in waxed canvas, lay a collection of ledgers, yellowed but intact, and a small wooden box. She lifted the ledgers out first. They were records, detailed inventories spanning decades, supplies, repairs, crop notes, weather cycles. Her grandmother had tracked everything with stunning precision. This wasn't hoarding, this was planning, preparing, anticipating. The box was lighter than expected. Inside, nestled in linen, was a simple gold necklace, a worn envelope with her name, and a document, a notarized deed confirming ownership of the house and the surrounding land not recently signed, but years ago, prepared, filed, stored. Amelia sat down on the floor, legs crossed beneath her, snow gently tapping the windows outside like a soft warning. The envelope shook in her hand as she opened it. Her grandmother's handwriting sharp, practical, loving in a way that didn't require flourishes. If you're reading this, you stayed. Good. This house was never meant to be visited. It was meant to be carried. Don't worry about whether you deserve it. That's not the point. What matters is what you do next. No sentiment, no nostalgia, just direction. And something shifted inside Amelia. All winter, she had thought of the house as a challenge to survive, a place she'd been trapped in, a strange inheritance from a woman she barely knew. But now, she saw it differently. This wasn't a gift, it was a trust. Her grandmother hadn't built this place for comfort. She had built it to hold. Through winters, through blackouts, through collapse, and maybe through generations. Amelia rose slowly and looked around, as if seeing everything for the first time. The beams weren't just old wood, they were in tension, locked into place by a woman who'd known storms were inevitable. And now, the question wasn't whether Amelia could stay. The question was, what would she do with what had been given? Over the next days, she moved differently. Purpose replaced hesitation. She cleared out unused shelves, sorted supplies with a system. She started annotating the ledgers, adding her own notes to the margins. What worked, what failed, what could be better. She began chopping wood with more care, learning to gauge moisture by feel. She reinforced the firewood cover under the canopy with scrap beams she found in the tool shed. Not because anyone told her to, but because that's what the house would have asked. And each night, as the forest settled into its frozen hush, she studied. Not books, not news, the house itself, its logic, its patterns, its quiet language. One morning, just before sunrise, she stood beneath the canopy wrapped in a wool coat, watching as frost curled off the beams. The forest before her was still, but not dead. It was waiting. Not for rescue, not for the thaw. For her. She thought of the city apartment, now occupied by someone else. She thought of the job that had vanished, the documents she'd signed in haste, the world that had chewed her up and spit her into this clearing. And for the first time, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt ready. Maybe the future didn't look like high-rises and lattes and performance reviews. Maybe it looked like this: a fire that needed tending, a roof that needed checking, a home that didn't care how much she used to make but only that she showed up. Fully, without flinching. This wasn't exile, it was entry. Into something old, something sacred, something that had survived the weight of winter just like her. Winter deepened. Snow piled high against the edges of the canopy, a white wall that made the world feel smaller, quieter. The road had long disappeared under thick drifts. Even the path to the woodshed became a daily effort. The forest no longer pretended to be friendly. It was honest now, vast, indifferent. But Amelia had changed. She no longer flinched at the silence, no longer waited for the outside world to fix her situation. Instead, her days began with purpose: firewood, water, repair, meals made from careful rationing, evenings spent in quiet study, not of screens, but of the ledgers, the structure, and herself. Her hands were different now, rough, lined, marked by splinters and frost. She no longer cared. They were her proof that she belonged here, not as a visitor or a runaway, but as someone slowly earning the right to stay. She didn't keep track of days anymore. Time had become task-based, not calendar-driven. Chop wood, feed fire, boil water, take care of what takes care of you. And the house did take care of her. It held warmth longer than it should have. Its walls seemed to anticipate shifts in weather before they happened. The wind never howled beneath the canopy. The snow never pressed against the door. At night, when doubt crept in like a draft, the house remained still, never comforting her with words, only presence. And slowly, she began to feel less like someone hiding from failure, and more like someone healing from it. But healing wasn't soft. It was labor. There were nights she cried from exhaustion. Days she cursed the cold. There were mornings she questioned if she was strong or just stuck. But she stayed. One evening, while restocking the firewood beneath the canopy, she heard the crunch of snow footsteps. She turned quickly, her breath misting in the air. It was her again. The old woman. This time, she didn't knock. She just stood beneath the wooden beams, looking around with approval. "You fix that hinge," the woman said, nodding toward a corner brace. She would have liked that. Amelia swallowed. "You knew her well, didn't you?" The woman didn't answer right away. She took a thermos from her satchel and poured them both a small cup of tea. "We weren't friends," she said. "Not in the way people talk about friendship, but we survived the same winter once. That makes you family, even if you never speak again." Amelia listened. The woman told her about a blizzard, years ago, when roads vanished and help never came. People had walked for miles, desperate. Eloise had opened the house, shared her supplies, divided labor, demanded effort. No one starved, no one froze, not because she was kind, but because she was prepared, and she expected the same from others. She didn't waste time comforting people who refused to act, the woman said with a small smile. But if you showed up ready to learn, she gave you everything. The fire crackled nearby. The canopy above them groaned under snow. "She didn't build this place to live alone," the woman added, softer now. "She built it so that if everything else failed, something would remain." Then she stood, patted Amelia's hand, and left as silently as she had come. And in that moment, Amelia knew something she hadn't dared believe. She was ready to carry it forward, not as an echo of her grandmother, not as a mirror, but as herself, a woman no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she was building. That night, she added a new entry to the ledgers, her handwriting beside Eloise's, a continuation, not a replacement. "Firewood split thicker. Storm coming. We'll add support to east beam in morning. House feels tight. Good." It wasn't poetry, but it was truth. And truth, she'd learned, was the strongest thing you could build with. Spring didn't arrive with fanfare. It crept in quietly, just like everything else the forest did. A softening of ice at the edges of the canopy, the sound of water dripping from branches that had held snow for months. The first whisper of birdsong, tentative and unsure. Amelia stood under the canopy, boots buried in slush, watching the world transform molecule by molecule. The road, once lost beneath layers of snow and silence, began to reveal itself again, not in full, but enough to remind her that the outside world was still there, waiting. The signal returned one afternoon, faint but undeniable. Her phone buzzed for the first time in months. Messages poured in missed calls, overdue notices, polite inquiries from people who had already moved on. The life she had walked away from hadn't collapsed. It had simply adjusted to her absence. She read through the messages with a strange detachment. There were opportunities, job interviews, even a tentative offer from her old employer, the kind of email that once would have made her heart race. But now it barely stirred her. She wasn't the same woman who had fled into the woods with her suitcase and her shame. That woman had believed security came from contracts, salaries, apartment keys. That woman had believed she could build her life around what others promised. The woman standing here now, rough hands, steady breath. Eyes softened by firelight and snowfall, knew better. She knew how to split wood, how to stretch rations, how to keep a fire burning through the coldest night. She knew that silence wasn't the absence of life, but a space where real life could finally speak. She had learned to endure not by bracing, but by bending. And most of all, she had learned to stay. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, deeply. The house no longer felt like someone else's. It felt like hers, because she had earned it not through inheritance, but through intimacy, through work, through attention. One morning, she stood at the edge of the path where the road reappeared. She could leave now. Nothing was stopping her. No snow, no storm, no loss. But the idea of leaving felt irrelevant. It wasn't that she had decided to live here forever. It was that she no longer needed to escape to feel whole. She walked back to the house, fingers brushing the side of the canopy, and stepped inside. That afternoon, she gathered the letters, the ledgers, and the deed. She didn't box them up. She organized them, curated them, like the beginnings of something she wasn't yet ready to name. A center, a sanctuary, a school, a story. It didn't matter yet what it would become. What mattered was that she was the one now deciding its future not out of obligation, but out of honor. As the days grew longer and the wind lost its bite, Amelia began making plans not to leave, but to build. Repairs, gardens, a second water catch system, maybe even solar. Not to modernize it, but to carry it forward, as her grandmother once did. One night, she sat beneath the canopy with a lantern beside her, listening to the forest breathe. No longer a stranger, no longer someone the house merely tolerated. She was its keeper now. And in that deep, quiet knowing, tears welled in her eyes not from sadness, but from a kind of gratitude so large it barely fit in her chest. She built it to last, the old woman had said. Now, Amelia whispered back, and I will help it continue. Not everyone gets a second chance. Fewer still recognize it when it arrives wearing the skin of isolation, cold, and loss. But Amelia had. She came to this house with nothing left to lose, and found, within its walls, everything she didn't know she was looking for: purpose, peace, and the quiet courage to begin again. Amelia's story reminds us that not all losses are tragedies. Some are invitations disguised as failure, wrapped in silence, delivered at the worst possible moment. When she lost her apartment, her job, and her sense of identity, she thought the world had ended. What she couldn't see was that something much older, deeper, and more enduring was already waiting for her. Her grandmother didn't leave her wealth. She left her wisdom, embedded in wood and wind, in fire and frost. And in claiming it, Amelia found what many of us spend a lifetime chasing. Not success, not recognition, but belonging. If this story touched you, subscribe. More true stories are on the way. And if someone you love believes in second chances, share this with them. Sometimes, the life you are meant for is hiding in the place you almost gave up on.